Today we're going to take a look at new perennials for 2025. Hi, I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings, and this year we are adding over 75 new perennial varieties. Of that, around 25 or so are new introductions from Proven Winners. And in today's video, we're going to talk about these new Proven Winner introductions. We're actually just going to look at about my top 10 or so favorites. So with there being 25, there's a lot of information there. So I just picked out 10 of them that really stood out to me as unique or different, or just maybe even some different genera that have been added into the collection. So other perennials that we'll be featuring in future videos will be our bloomables line, as well as our generic line of perennials. And just because we're naming them generic, it doesn't mean that they're not great plants. They're just basically a perennial that does not have a brand associated with it. So we're going to break these down into little nuggets of information for all or a good portion of these new perennials. But as mentioned, today we're going to take a look at my top 10 Proven Winner new introductions for 2025. The first one on my list is a Thalictrum or meadow rue, and it's been several years since we've carried meadow rue here at Garden Crossings. Back 20 some years ago when we started, I know we had a few in our collection at that time, but we haven't had them in the last few years or so. So this was pretty exciting. When I was out at the trial gardens at Walter's Gardens, which is where I go frequently, usually about two plus times a month, just going through the trial gardens, looking at the plants, how are they performing, when are they blooming, just all those various things. That all goes into, when I'm talking about a plant, it has to be a plant that I've seen, in a real setting, or that we've trialed in our trial gardens, because I want to make sure that I'm able to bring you the best information that I know on these new varieties, since there's not a lot of information out there on them yet. So this is a meadow rue called Cotton Candy. And when I was out in the trial gardens, I noticed them planted in a part shade or part sun location of the garden. There was a lot of hostas in there, just various more part shade type plants. And you would see these little puffs of, I'm going to call it smoke. It wasn't smoke, but just these little puffs of bloom that were just nestling and kind of blowing in the breeze above some of those more lower growing mounding type habit perennials. It was really adding great texture to the garden. They were blooming early summer, so this is a great plant to add early summer color into the garden. So as I mentioned, light lavender flowers, just clusters of very airy looking flowers, bringing just fantastic foliage to that space. Cotton Candy is hardy in zones 5 to 8. And as mentioned, I saw them in a part shade, part sun garden, but they can also be grown in full sun locations. They're a nice plant for pollinators for that early, your earlier garden. And one nice thing too is I'm going to be trying to feature a lot of plants that are deer and rabbit resistant, because I know a lot of people have issues with deer specifically. I hear a lot of comments about deer issues, but usually too, if you're having deer issues, usually rabbits kind of follow suit. So I will be mentioning too if these plants are deer or rabbit resistant, which I can tell you there are a lot of plants we're talking about today that will be deer resistant. So if you're just looking to add some unique texture, a different looking flower form to the garden, the Cotton Candy Thalictrum is a great selection to add in. Now, the next plant we're going to talk about is a Heliopsis, and we've been carrying Heliopsis for several years. Over the last few years, though, Proven Winners has had some fantastic introductions. They always will have like that bright golden yellow bloom, but sometimes it's a singular bloom, sometimes it's semi-double to double. So it's got different flower forms, but we're also seeing interest in the foliage now. So the new introduction for this year is called Touch of Blush. Touch of Blush features variegated foliage, and it has just a hint of blush around the edges of the leaves. So you're not only getting the beautiful flower color, you're getting a lot of interest from that foliage as well. The thing I like about Heliopsis is they are long blooming. So if you are looking for a flower that will bloom throughout the summer, Heliopsis definitely is a long blooming perennial. Now, one thing I will point out, they are not deer resistant. So if you have deer or rabbits in the garden, that could be an issue for you. Heliopsis are a heat-loving, drought-tolerant plant once established. So if you are, somewhere where it's really warm and maybe experience a little bit of drought, once you get these plants established, they'll be able to handle those locations really well. And actually, in fact, we find in the greenhouse, if we're giving them too much water, or if it's still earlier in the season when it's not quite warm enough yet, they take a little bit of time to start blooming. But once they get that heat behind them, they really put on a beautiful summer show. They're hardy in zones 4 to 9. They are a native or nativar variety, like to be grown in full sun to part sun locations, and are great for pollinators as well as making a great cut flower. The next plant on my list, I have done a lot of videos on the Dicentra pink diamonds, bleeding heart, because they have just blown me away. And there were so many different surprises with them that, I don't know, it was just shocking to me. I wasn't familiar with that type of bleeding heart, I guess you would say. So that collection has now been expanded. So in addition to the pink diamonds Dicentra, there is now a beautiful white one called White Diamonds. White Diamonds is going to have all of the great qualities that pink diamonds has, with its beautiful blue-green fern-like foliage, large clusters of flowers that bloom all summer long. And when I say all summer, we're in Michigan here. It usually starts blooming in May, and it was still blooming in October. Now, we did have a fairly warm season this year, but usually in Michigan, our perennials kind of start petering out after Labor Day. But we still had a strong flush of flowers through September and into October. So this is a very hardworking perennial to add into your full sun gardens. So yes, a lot of times, like myself, I thought Dicentra were a shade plant or a part shade plant. But this particular variety of bleeding heart actually thrives best in full sun locations. So if you're looking to have some of those shade favorite plants, but in the sun, this is definitely one that you can bring into the sun, and it will reward you with beautiful white dangling, bleeding heart looking flowers all summer long. It's hardy in zones 3 to 9, so it has a big spectrum as far as where it can be grown here in the United States. So I would say for just about almost everyone watching right now, this is a plant that you could plant in your garden. It gets about 16 or so inches tall and spreads to about 20 inches wide, forming a nice mounding type habit. And this too is a deer resistant perennial. So for those of you who have watched me for any amount of time, you know I have a love for Alstroemeria or Peruvian lilies. And in the past, we've grown a lot of the Inca series, and we've had Inca Jolie, Inca Ice, and those were both great Peruvian lilies for my Zone 6A garden. They would overwinter well, they would get about 2 to 3 foot tall, and they would bloom all summer long. Well, the unfortunate thing is both of those varieties are no longer on the market or are extremely hard to get your hands on. So we haven't been able to carry either of those varieties for, I think we're going on year 3 now. The last couple years we did add others in of the Inca series, but most of those were only hardy in zone 7 or 8. So for us here in Michigan, it was often needed to be grown as an annual. Although I must say, in my garden, I did have small microclimates that did allow that plant to overwinter, so that was a pretty cool surprise. But one of the problems with that plant, and I shouldn't say problem, right plant, right place, right? But those non-hardy Alstroemerias, they're very short. They're only about 12 or so inches tall. So they really don't put on a big upright show of color in the garden. They do bloom all summer, which is great, but they're just, because they're so short and small, they're more of a front of the border plant and not like a big, huge specimen plant. So this year, Proven Winners has introduced 3 new Alstroemerias. Now, unfortunately, we were only able to get one because inventory was very limited, but we were able to add summer heat to our collection this year. And in the trial gardens last year, oh man, they put on a magnificent show. They would kind of plant them in groupings of 3, which a lot of times in the trial gardens, that's what you see is they plant odd numbers. They'll plant 3 or 5 of a variety. And they did so in various areas all over the garden, and they were blooming all summer and just eye-catching, vibrant, big masses of color. They are hardy in zones 6 to 9. So for us here in Michigan, they overwinter well, upwards to zone 9. Now, if you're a zone 5 and you want to give them a try, I would encourage you to give them a try. There is a chance, depending on microclimates within your garden, they may be able to overwinter. I don't want to guarantee it. I don't want to put, thoughts in your head like, oh, she said. But if I were you, I would definitely give it a try and see how it does. So summer heat gets 42 inches tall. So it's a nice tall variety. Somewhere if you want to place it in the middle of the garden or in the back of the garden, it's definitely going to be a nice columnar habit. The flowers are kind of orangish reddish color. Some of the other varieties that are coming out will be shades of pink and shades of yellow. So those are two other ones to look forward to hopefully next year. But this orangish reddish blooms are fantastic. Alstroemeria are very long blooming as a cut flower. So if you want to use them as cut flowers, bring them inside, put them in a vase, the flowers can last up to 2 weeks. So that's really cool. One tip I do have for you though, when you are trimming your Alstroemeria for cutting, it's recommended to actually pull the flower, like find the stem of the flower and pull it out of the plant. So that was just one tip we were told when we were out doing trials or walkthroughs in the trial garden. So something to give a try. Instead of cutting it, just pull the flower out. Another new variety this year, and this one, it's got a fun name for sure. It's Alium Bobblehead. I know that so many of you love Allium Millennium and Allium Serendipity. Both of those are fantastic alliums. Pollinators love them, and we sell a ton of both of those varieties. So with people loving allium, it was really cool that Proven Winners added this new allium to the collection, Bobblehead, which features a lighter purple or lavender color bloom. So if you wanted to they're still purple, which Serendipity and Millennium are also purple. But if you wanted to kind of have different shades of purple in the garden, this Allium Bobblehead is going to give you just a little bit different shade. Also, too, the flowers are slightly larger than Millennium and Serendipity. So that's another kind of feature of this plant. So Allium or Bobblehead is drought tolerant once it's established. And I always want to say that plants can be drought tolerant, but you've got to get them established first. You just can't put a drought tolerant plant in on a terrible planting condition, or any plant for that matter, and expect it to thrive. You have to put it in the right condition. You have to water it, especially, when the plant is young, so it can get established, so then it can grow and thrive as it's supposed to. Allium Bobblehead is hardy in zones 4 to 8. It can be grown in sun to part sun locations. It's deer and rabbit resistant. And I'm going to say, technically it's fragrant, but it's part of the onion family. So it does smell like onions. So if you like the smell of onions, well, that's what you're going to get a little bit of when you're planting allium. If there's one plant in our gardens that is just an absolute honeybee, bumblebee, native bee magnet, it's certainly any form of allium. The pollinators love alliums, and the butterflies do as well. We often see the monarch butterflies hanging out on the allium plants. But if you're looking for a plant that blooms midsummer and is really great for the pollinators, Allium Bobblehead is going to be a great addition to your pollinator garden. The next variety is actually a Stokes Aster or Stokesia. And we have grown Peachy's Pick Stokesia for several years. People love it. It's long blooming. But Proven Winners has added 2 new Stokesia this year. White Cap is the white version that we're going to talk about today. And why I like Stokesia is because they are, again, another long blooming perennial that's easy to care for, that you can put in your garden. It's got masses of, I'm going to say daisy-like, but I'm going to call them daisy-like because I guess that's going to be the picture most that I can kind of compare it to flowers, although they're a little bit more frilly than a daisy, I would say, but just masses of large white flowers. And this particular one, the flower is primarily white, but you will see throughout the season just hints of a blush pink on the tips of the blooms. So if you're like, okay, this is a white flower, but mine's turning pink, it is supposed to do that. So you will see some hints of pink on your white flowers of white caps. It starts blooming midsummer and blooms usually through or after Labor Day for us here in Michigan. If it does stop blooming at any point, just give it a nice little trim, deadhead it, and usually it'll send up more blooms for repeat or continuous blooms throughout the summer. It's also deer and rabbit resistant. So for those of you making a list of deer and rabbit resistant plants, whitecaps is one you can add to your list. Drought tolerant once it's established, and Stokesia is a native perennial variety. Now, for those of you who know me and again have watched my gardens and different areas that we plant either here at Garden Crossings or at my home garden, you know that I kind of tend to go for those vibrant, bright colors. And when we're talking tall phlox, there's a lot of gorgeous, bright colors available in the tall phlox. Now, one thing, a lot of older varieties of tall phlox would have issues with powdery mildew. And obviously it's no fun to have powdery mildew on your plants. So what Proven Winners has done, or Walter's Gardens has done, is in the breeding of the new plant varieties of tall phlox that they're introducing, they're looking for varieties that have excellent disease resistance. Now, I'm not going to say you're never going to see powdery mildew on your plants. You know, that can always happen, but it's not going to be one that is prone to it, or you're going to find it happening a lot on. Now, one way to kind of help with powdery mildew is to make sure there's enough spacing around your plants so that it gets good airflow. That is key to helping keep that powdery mildew at bay. The new variety that I'm really loving this year is part of the Luminary series, and it's called Pink Lightning. Vibrant pink. It's almost like bubblegum intensified. It's super vibrant pink. And the thing that's nice about it is not only does it have that beautiful pink bloom, in the center of it, there's kind of like a white, I'm going to call it watermark or halo. So essentially it's a little bit of a bicolor look, although it's not pink white bicolor. It's pink with just kind of, if I say a watermark, that's just kind of a softening of the pink in the center of the blooms. It forms large clusters of flowers, so you're going to have a nice tall upright plant, about 36 or so inches tall by about 30 inches wide, with deep green foliage, and at the top you're just going to have masses of beautiful bright pink blooms. When that plant stops flowering, give it a light trim and it will be back at it probably within about 3 weeks or so with more additional flowers. And that's true with your perennials. When they are done flowering, a lot of perennials, if you deadhead them or trim them, they will reward you with additional blooms. Now, there's certain varieties that just don't, but a lot of perennials, if you give them a light trim, they will rebloom throughout the summer for you. Tall phlox is also a great pollinator plant for the hummingbirds, and mostly butterflies really enjoy it. So a great addition to pollinator gardens. Cut flowers, if you'd like to bring those flowers inside. The nice tall stems here on the Pink Lightning are great to bring in as a cut flower. Another long blooming perennial that we watched out in the trial gardens this year were penstemon. So not the tall penstemon. These are a little bit shorter penstemon with the purples, the pinks, the roses, the red color flowers. So the new ones we're talking about this year for the Proven Winners series are the Bejeweled series. There's pink pearls and also rose rhinestones. Pink pearls is a nice, rich, clean, bright pink. Rose rhinestones is a little bit deeper, rosier pink. Both of them look great if you plant them near each other, or if your garden tends to be more of the bright pink skew or the more reddish pink, you do have options with these two different colorations. So they typically will start blooming early summer and continue to bloom throughout the summer. This is another variety. If the flowers stop blooming, just deadhead them off, and usually you'll see some additional blooms that will continue throughout the summer. The pollinators, they love the tubular flowers. So the flowers are a little bit smaller. They're not like long tubes, they're little smaller tubes. But any plant that has tubular flowers typically is a plant that the hummingbirds are going to really love. Anything they can kind of stick their little beak into. And that's a lot of times that's true for just pollinator plants in general. You'll find a lot of them do have more of those tubular looking flowers. Penstemon is hardy in zones 4 to 8. This particular variety, about 20 inches tall or so by 24 inches wide. So a little bit more of a, I'm not saying spreading, but we're going to say spreading mounding habit. So it's a little shorter than what it is wide, but just kind of a nice size plant for maybe front of the borders or even maybe the next tier back in the garden because they don't get overly tall. They also do make a nice cut flower. They are drought tolerant once they get established, and they are also, Penstemon in general, are a native plant variety. So now the varieties I'm talking about as natives, they're technically called nativars, which is a cultivar of a native species. So somebody will always say to me, Heidi, that is not native. You will not find that in nature. Well, you're absolutely right. You will not find bejeweled pink pearls in nature, but you will find penstemon out in nature that are native. So when we're looking at plants and planting up our gardens, it's not always about the flowers. There's a lot of great perennials that have fantastic foliage. So as we all know, perennials don't flower typically all summer long. Although we do have a lot of great introductions this year that are long blooming, most perennials will not bloom all summer long. So that's where the foliage is important to poke in your garden. Be it a hosta, be it a heuchera, but just be it something that has nice foliage. So the new heuchera for this year is a beautiful black colored heuchera. It's called prom dress. The thing I like about prom dress is, as I mentioned, it's got really deep, dark black foliage, heavily ruffled edges, which is true of all of the dressed up series of heuchera. They all have the really heavily ruffled edges. And prom dress is so pretty with that dark black. It has a beautiful silver overlay on it. So you're getting black, you're getting silver, and then the veining of the leaves is coming through that silver. So you're kind of getting a lot of depth and dimension on each of the leaves because of the silver black overlay. Heuchera are hardy in zones 4 to 9, and this particular variety gets about 10 or so inches tall by 18 inches wide. So the foliage itself doesn't get super tall. It's a great plant for more front of the garden beds. It does send up flower spikes that are about 10 or so inches taller than the foliage. So if you are, they're very airy, they're very, I'm going to say insignificant, because the flowers on dress up prom dress, in my opinion, aren't super significant. So sometimes what we'll do with our heuchera, if they don't have the significant flowers, is we'll just trim them off so that way it doesn't distract from the beautiful foliage. I probably shouldn't have just said that, but it's true. With heuchera, there's a lot of them that do have pretty flowers, but there's equally a lot of them that don't. So sometimes you're buying them for the flower colors, other times you're buying them for the foliage interest. So somebody's going to debate on this, but typically it's either flower interest or foliage interest when it comes to heuchera. They can be grown in full sun to full shade areas. Now, for those of you in warmer climates, probably you're going to want to go more the part sun, part shade, and shade so they don't burn up. But for us here in the north, they can tolerate full sun gardens. Native heuchera are native varieties. Again, you're not going to find dressed up prom dress out in nature, but heuchera is a native plant variety. They're great for borders, container gardens, plant them in mass, or just plant a singular one in your front of your landscape. Because of that foliage interest, they're always showing off all summer long. And the last plant on our list is Campanula. Glomerata bells and whistles. And these Campanula have been fantastic in the trial gardens. Again, another plant that just really has showed off. There's a white and a purple this year. They start blooming early summer. So if you're looking for early summer color to your garden, this Campanula would be a good one to choose. It has a nice upright mounding habit. It kind of stays in its own little clump, about 26 or so inches tall, 26 inches wide, creates just a nice kind of upright mounding habit. It has clusters of beautiful purple blooms. So bells and whistles is the purple variety, and just large clusters of blooms on upright spikes that stand above the nice dark glossy green foliage. This is another variety. If and when it is done flowering, go ahead and give it a light trim, and it might reward you with additional blooms throughout the summer. So I love plants that give you not only, one show of color, but then also reward you with later, or what I call bonus blooms, later on in the summer if you do give them a little love and a little care by trimming them back. Campanula bells and whistles is a deer-resistant perennial. Pollinators, again, they love these tubular flowers. Those purple flowers they're a little bit smaller, but again, tubular, and the pollinators just really enjoy the blooms on these plants. It's another great cut flower, so if you are looking to add to your cut flower garden, the nice long stems with the large clusters of flowers make an excellent selection for cut flower gardens. So these are my top 10 new Proven Winner Perennials for 2025. We're going to be putting links down in the description below. So if you want more information on any of these plants, you can head down into the description below, and we'll be able to take you directly to our website where you can get all the information you want. Also, we are a mail order company, so we do ship across the United States, as well as our garden center located in Zeeland, Michigan. So if there's anything you want to pre-order for spring, summer delivery, you can do so now at any time. Thanks for watching. I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings.